There are moments in life when everything around you seems to be telling you that you are running out of options. You look at your circumstances and you see closed doors. You look at your past and you see mistakes. You look at your present and you see uncertainty. And when you look toward the future, you may not see anything clearly at all. But what if the place you are standing in right now is not the place where your story ends? What if the season that has exhausted you is only the final chapter of an old season? What if the doors that closed were not proof that God had forgotten you, but evidence that He was moving you away from places that could never become your true home? Stay with me until the end, because this message is not simply about finding a physical house. It is about finding your place, your season, your peace, your restoration, your belonging. There is a kind of home that has nothing to do with walls, furniture, an address, or a neighborhood. It is the place where your heart finally stops fighting for permission to exist. It is the place where you no longer have to convince people of your worth. It is the place where you stop waking up every morning wondering whether everything is going to fall apart. It is the place where you can finally breathe. And perhaps you have been asking God for that place without realizing that your prayer was already being answered through the changes happening around you. You may have called it loss. God may have been calling it relocation. You may have called it rejection. God may have been using it to redirect you. You may have called it delay. God may have been preparing you. And you may have looked at an empty space in your life and thought, nothing is happening. But sometimes the empty space is exactly where something new is being built. Think about that for a moment. Before a house is built, there is often an empty piece of land. Before a new beginning, there is often an ending. Before restoration, there can be a season when everything familiar disappears. And that is why you should not judge your future by the appearance of your present. Your current surroundings do not have the authority to define your final destination. There are people listening right now who have been feeling displaced. You may have lost a relationship. You may have left a job. You may have moved away from people you once trusted. You may have watched opportunities disappear. You may have experienced a season where nothing seemed stable. And somewhere inside, you began asking one painful question. Where do I belong now? That question can become heavy, because human beings were created with a deep need for belonging. We want to know that there is a place where we are accepted, a place where we are safe, a place where we are understood, a place where we can put down the weight we have been carrying. But sometimes God allows you to become uncomfortable in an old place, because you have outgrown it. You keep asking for peace while continuing to hold onto the environment that steals your peace. You keep asking for a new beginning, while trying to preserve everything connected to the old beginning. You keep asking for a new home while emotionally living in an old season. And eventually, something has to change. Not because God wants to punish you, but because growth requires movement. A seed cannot remain comfortable inside the soil forever. At some point, it must break open. And from the outside, that breaking can look like destruction. But underneath the surface, life is beginning. That is what may be happening in your life right now. The breaking may not be the end. It may be the beginning. You may not understand why certain people walked away. You may not understand why certain opportunities disappeared. You may not understand why the plan you worked so hard for suddenly collapsed. You may not understand why you had to start over, but you do not need to understand every chapter before you can trust the author. Sometimes your greatest mistake is demanding a complete explanation before taking the next step. Faith does not mean that you know everything. Faith means that you continue walking, even when you cannot see the entire road. And there is something important you need to hear today. Your new home does not have to look like your old dream. That is one of the hardest lessons to accept, because we often tell God what our blessing should look like. We create a picture. We choose the timing. We choose the people. We choose the location. We choose the outcome. And then when life takes a different direction, we assume that something went wrong. But what if the difference is not a mistake? What if the difference is the blessing? What if you have been mourning something that God was trying to replace? What if the door you wanted was too small for where you were going? What if the relationship you begged to keep would have prevented you from becoming the person you were meant to become? What if the environment you were desperate to remain in could never support the future you were being prepared for? Sometimes God answers prayers by removing what you thought you needed. That kind of answer can hurt. It can feel confusing. It can even feel cruel for a while, but time has a way of revealing what emotion cannot. There are things you will one day thank God for removing. There are doors you will eventually be grateful did not open. There are people whose absence will eventually make sense. There are places you once wanted to stay that you will later realize were never meant to become your permanent home. And when that realization comes, you will understand why the transition had to happen. You will look back and say, now I understand. But until that day comes, you must learn how to live without having every answer. That is where trust becomes real. Anyone can trust when everything makes sense. Real faith begins when the map is incomplete. Maybe your life currently feels like an unfinished house. There are rooms you cannot enter yet. There are walls that have not been painted. There are doors that have not been installed. There are places that still look empty. And you are tempted to say, this is not what I imagined. But construction is messy. Preparation is messy. Transformation is messy. You cannot walk into a construction site and complain that the building does not look finished. It is not finished. Neither are you. Stop demanding perfection from a process that is still unfolding. Stop comparing your unfinished chapter to somebody else's finished-looking chapter. You do not know what is happening behind their walls. You do not know what they survived. You do not know what they sacrificed. You do not know what they are carrying. And most importantly, their timeline is not your timeline. Your journey has its own rhythm. There may be a reason you had to wait. There may be a reason you had to walk alone for a while. There may be a reason you had to lose certain connections. There may be a reason you had to become stronger before receiving what you were asking for. Because sometimes the blessing is not the difficult part. Sometimes becoming capable of carrying the blessing is the difficult part. Imagine giving a fragile container something incredibly valuable. The value of the gift does not matter if the container cannot hold it. In the same way, there are things you may be praying for that require a stronger version of you. Greater responsibility requires greater maturity. Greater influence requires greater discipline. Greater peace requires greater boundaries. Greater love requires greater emotional wisdom. Greater opportunity requires greater preparation. So when you are waiting, do not assume nothing is happening. Preparation can be invisible. Roots grow underground before a tree becomes visible above the ground. The foundation of a building is buried before anyone admires the architecture. And some of the most important work God does in your life may happen where nobody else can see it. He may be changing your character, changing your priorities, changing your relationships, changing your understanding, changing what you tolerate, changing what you desire, changing what you believe you deserve. And one day you may realize that the biggest miracle was not that your circumstances changed. The biggest miracle was that you changed. You became someone who could finally recognize the door you had been praying for. Because sometimes the door is already in front of you, but fear keeps you from opening it. You may say, I am not ready. You may say, what if I fail? You may say, what if it doesn't work? You may say, what if I lose everything again? That is where your past can become a prison. A painful past can teach you wisdom, but it can also teach you fear. If you were betrayed before, you may fear trusting again. If you failed before, you may fear trying again. If you lost something before, you may fear receiving something new because you are already imagining losing it. But you cannot build a new home while constantly living in fear of the old fire. At some point, you have to understand, what happened to you is part of your story. It is not necessarily the definition of your future. Your past can explain you without controlling you. Your scars can remind you without imprisoning you. Your failures can teach you without naming you. And your old address does not have to remain your permanent address. There is a new chapter available, but you must be willing to leave the old chapter. This is where many people become stuck. They want new results with old habits. They want a new life while maintaining the same thinking. They want peace while continuing to entertain chaos. They want healthy relationships while repeatedly choosing people who disrespect them. They want confidence while constantly speaking against themselves. They want abundance while living in permanent fear of scarcity. They want a new home while refusing to move out of the old mindset. Something has to change, and sometimes the first thing that needs to change is the voice inside your own head. Listen carefully. You have probably spent years hearing voices that told you what you could not become. Maybe someone told you that you were not smart enough. Maybe someone told you that you were not attractive enough. Maybe someone told you that you would never succeed. Maybe someone treated you as if you were disposable. Maybe someone made you feel like you had to earn the right to be loved. And after hearing those voices long enough, you may have started repeating them to yourself. That is how internal prisons are built. The person who once criticized you may no longer be in your life, but their voice may still live inside your thoughts. You need to recognize that. Not every thought deserves agreement. Not every fear deserves obedience. Not every memory deserves authority. And not every opinion you receive deserves to become part of your identity. Your future requires you to become selective about what you allow to define you. There will be people who cannot recognize your future because they only know your past. Do not become angry with them. They are looking through the lens of what they have already seen. But you are not required to remain what they remember. People can know the old you and still be completely wrong about the new you. That is why you cannot ask everyone for permission before changing. If you wait until everyone understands your transformation, you may never transform. Some people will only understand your new life after they see the results. And even then, some will still not understand. That is okay. You are not here to make everyone understand. You are here to become who you were created to become. Your new home may require a new level of courage. You may have to say no. You may have to walk away. You may have to stop explaining yourself. You may have to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You may have to choose peace over popularity. You may have to choose purpose over comfort. And that can feel lonely. But loneliness and abandonment are not always the same thing. Sometimes solitude is the whole way between one season and another. You may be alone because you are being prepared for something different. Do not rush to fill every empty space. An empty room is not automatically a problem. Sometimes it is an invitation. Sometimes God leaves space because something new needs room to enter. And this is where you must become patient, not passive. Patient. There is a difference. Patience does not mean sitting around doing nothing. Patience means continuing to prepare while trusting the timing. If you are waiting for a new opportunity, become more prepared. If you are waiting for a healthier relationship, become healthier emotionally. If you are waiting for greater responsibility, become more disciplined. If you are waiting for a new chapter, stop rehearsing the old one. Your future deserves preparation. You do not prepare for a new home by constantly cleaning the old one forever. Eventually you pack. Eventually you move. Eventually you unlock the door. Eventually you step inside. And there is always a moment during a move when you stand between two places. The old place is behind you. The new place is ahead. And for a brief moment, you belong completely to neither. That in-between space can feel strange. That is where many people are right now. You are no longer who you were, but you have not fully become who you are becoming. You have left the old environment, but you have not yet arrived at the new one. You have stopped accepting certain things, but you have not yet received the better things. You have outgrown your old identity, but the new identity still feels unfamiliar. That is transition. And transition can feel like confusion, but confusion does not always mean you are lost. Sometimes it means the old map no longer works. You are learning a new way of moving. You are learning to trust differently. You are learning to choose differently. You are learning to see differently. And perhaps that is exactly why this season has felt so uncomfortable. You are not being destroyed. You are being repositioned. The word repositioned matters. Because sometimes you do not need a new life. You need a new position, a new perspective, a new environment, a new relationship with yourself, a new relationship with God, a new understanding of what matters. Imagine a person standing in a dark room looking for a window. They may spend hours searching, but if someone moves the lamp, suddenly they see the door. The door was there the entire time. The problem was not the absence of an exit. The problem was the absence of light. Sometimes your prayer is not answered by creating something new. Sometimes the light simply comes on, and suddenly you see what was already there. You see the opportunity. You see the person. You see the lesson. You see the path. You see the reason. You see yourself differently. That is why you should never underestimate what clarity can do. A clear mind can change an entire life, and perhaps the new home you have been asking for begins with clarity. Clarity about what you will no longer accept. Clarity about what you value. Clarity about what kind of people belong in your life. Clarity about what kind of environment helps you grow. Clarity about what you are willing to sacrifice. Clarity about what you truly want. Because if you do not know what home means to you, you can enter beautiful places and still feel homeless. You can have money and still feel empty. You can have people around you and still feel alone. You can have success and still have no peace. A true home begins within. It is the place inside you where fear no longer controls every decision. It is where gratitude can coexist with ambition. It is where you can acknowledge your pain without worshiping it. It is where you can remember your past without becoming trapped inside it. It is where you can look at your mistakes and still believe you have a future. That is the home you need first. Because when you become anchored internally, external circumstances stop having absolute power over you. You can move without losing yourself. You can lose something without losing your identity. You can be rejected without rejecting yourself. You can be alone without believing you are worthless. You can experience uncertainty without assuming everything will fail. That is strength. And perhaps this is why your new address cannot simply be a physical location. Your new address is a new level of consciousness, a new level of faith, a new level of self-respect, a new level of peace, a new level of wisdom. And when you arrive there, some old things will no longer fit. That is normal. You may outgrow conversations. You may outgrow environments. You may outgrow habits. You may outgrow certain relationships. You may even outgrow the version of yourself that once felt familiar. Do not be afraid of that. Growth is supposed to change your shape. A child cannot wear the same clothes forever. Eventually, what once fit becomes too small. The same is true emotionally and spiritually. What once fit your life may now be too small for where you are going. Do not force yourself back into a smaller version of yourself just because it is familiar. Familiar does not mean healthy. Familiar does not mean safe. Familiar does not mean destined. Sometimes familiar is simply familiar. And the unknown can be frightening precisely because it is unknown. But the unknown is also where possibility lives. You cannot experience something new without entering territory you have never experienced before. So if your life feels unfamiliar right now, do not automatically assume you made a mistake.